Okay, thank you, Jing Jing. And thank you very much. I like seeing all the familiar faces and everybody. And if you're joining us on YouTube, this is our last session in this Seed to Supper segment. At the bottom of the screen down here, I have the web address for the Seed to Supper manual. So you can get your phone out and take a quick picture. I will also have it a little bit later on another page. So let's get started. And let's see, Jing Jing, I'm unable to go to the next slide. Can you give me some help here? Oh, there we go. Okay, got it. I love internet glitches. Okay, gardening is a healthful activity. It gets you outside, it gets you in the fresh air. Yes, at times it can be frustrating, but for the most part, it's activity that is fun and it has a great purpose. Part of this last session is reminding you that vegetables are a very nutritional substance. And in your Seed to Supper manual, there are recipes and there are more pages that talk about the different nutritional values for vegetables. Please consider trying to eat a rainbow of your fruits and vegetables. Okay, enough of the nutrition for a moment. I do want to talk a little bit about container gardening. Many people like to grow tomatoes in containers, and other people will try different vegetables such as lettuces. Last week, we had a slide of Peg's garden, Peg who did our second segment, and she had radishes in a window box. So container gardening can be very popular if you have limited space or if you just don't want to dive into a half-acre garden right away. To get started with container gardening, try to get a proper size, non-toxic container with drainage holes. Not only should you have drainage holes in the bottom of your container, but possibly in the side. You don't want to have water pooling and collecting in the bottom of your container because that could possibly rot the roots. Roots will eventually take up the entire container, and you want to have as many roots as possible to keep the plant healthy. If you have a container like this ceramic one in the picture that just has holes in the bottom, consider propping up the container with rocks or something else so that the water can drain freely from the bottom. You also need a lightweight potting mix. Some people have asked, well, why can't I use just soil right from my garden? Well, if you're like me, trying to move a container with regular garden soil, I mean, you really need to be, you need to have a lot more muscles than I have. Using potting mix, the containers are lighter and not as heavy to move. Also, when Peg did her segment of the second session, she mentioned soil compacting, and also Roxy in the third session mentioned soil compacting. If you use regular garden soil, the soil in your pot will just get so dense and so heavy that the plants will have trouble thriving. Watering is extremely important for container gardening. As I mentioned last week, in the very warm, hot days of July and August, you may have to water your container 2-3 times during the day, because especially if you have it on a concrete or blacktop surface, the roots will just dry out. And the last thing is fertilizing. When you water so much, any nutrition that was in your potting mix is kind of leached out into the ground and no longer available for the roots of your vegetable plant. you will need to be the one to supply fertilizer. And chances are during the peak growing season, it's a good idea to fertilize at least every 2 weeks with a water-soluble fertilizer. Yes, there are some time-release fertilizers, but the best thing is a water-soluble one. And as I mentioned last week, your textbook has excellent resources comparing organic fertilizers to chemical or synthetic fertilizers. Okay, what can be grown in a container vegetable garden? Well, green beans, yellow beans, lettuce, radishes, yellow squash. And if that's not enough, potatoes. They're very good for container gardening. Peppers, very excellent, excellent. And the ever popular tomatoes. When you are choosing a container, kind of think outside the box. Any type of non-toxic container that has ample drainage would make a great container to grow your vegetables in. I do want to add a comment that all the pictures on this page and the previous page are all vegetables that have been grown by our Master Gardener volunteers in containers. None of these were from the internet. These are all from our Master Gardener volunteers. Okay. The idea behind growing a garden is to harvest fresh vegetables. And your book has some excellent, excellent tips about getting the most from your garden. First of all, whenever your vegetable is ripest, that's when it has the most or the peak nutritional content. If you're not sure if a vegetable is ripe, you can easily contact one of our cooperative extension offices, check online, or go to your grocery store and see what a ripe vegetable looks like. It's a good idea to harvest when the plants are cool, either in the morning or evening. Obviously, this may not be possible all times, but this is when it is recommended. The reason is, if your picked produce sits in the sun or in the heat for an extended period of time, the nutritional value and also possibly the flavor and the entire vegetable may deteriorate a little bit. If you do happen to pick during the heat of the day, try to keep your produce in the shade. And obviously, try to avoid bruising it when you do pick it. Bruising can cause a deterioration of the vegetable. Okay, for the next few slides, I'm going to talk about some popular vegetables, and I'm going to go kind of quickly. If you have a question about any of these vegetables, or if you have any issues or have had issues about them, please put it in the chat box, and Jing Jing will interrupt me and I will talk about them. So we'll start out. Oh, sorry. Your book mentions cut and come again. I wanted to put this slide in because what that refers to when you read that in your book, cutting the outside leaves of your vegetable rather than the inner growth center. So you'll see this with a few of the vegetables on the slides. Okay, here we go. Tomatoes are the most popular, #1 grown vegetable in the United States. And as the picture on the bottom shows, they come in so many different sizes, shapes, and varieties. And it's expanding every single year. Now, I do want to mention, when you grow tomatoes, if the temperature in the evening is below 50 degrees or even 55 degrees, the tomato blossoms on your plant may not set fruit. That means that it may be too cool in the evening for the blossom to produce a fruit. So be aware, if you put your vegetable plants out last week in the snow, if there were any blossoms, they probably didn't set fruit. Also, tomatoes may not set fruit when the temperature gets too high. So if we have temperatures in the upper 80s and 90s, you may see some of your blossoms that just drop off without producing nice round green fruit that will turn red. There's another thing about tomatoes, especially ones that are first coming out at the beginning of the season. You may see your tomato turning red on the plant. And you may go, oh, a couple more days and I'm going to pick it. And it gets redder and redder. And you say, oh, I'm going to pick it. And you go and you pick it and you look at the bottom and, oh, there is this ugly, ugly, black, icky looking thing. That's called blossom end rot. It's very common, nothing to worry about. And there's two possible causes for that. First of all, a calcium deficiency. When Roxy had her presentation on the third week, she talked about grinding up eggshells and putting them in the soil when she plants her tomatoes. There are some products that you can buy in a reputable nursery or garden store that will add calcium to your tomato plants. Don't be surprised if you've added calcium and you're still getting some of this blossom end rot. Blossom end rot can also be caused by extreme or inefficient watering. That's why I like to put mulch down, grass mulch or cardboard around my tomatoes to keep them as evenly moist as possible. I'm not going to go into the chemistry, but it has to do with the chemistry of calcium being absorbed up through the roots and into the stem and getting to the plant. Hey, there's another thing that you might see on your tomatoes throughout the growing year, and that's cracks in the skin. If we have a really, really dry summer, and all of a sudden we get a solid day and a half of rain, well, all that sudden moisture is going to be going through your tomato roots up into the plant, into the actual tomato fruit, and the tomato fruit just can't handle this sudden influx of moisture, and they crack. Now, can you eat plants that are cracked? The one on the left, definitely. Just slice out where it's cracked there. The one on the right, I would examine it closely. If it looks like it's a little bit icky, no, I wouldn't eat it. Be safe with everything. I've also picked cherry tomatoes, especially in the heat of the day. I know when I shouldn't, but I want to have them in a salad. Brought them in to rinse off, and they crack while I'm rinsing them off. That's perfectly fine to use. Now, how about the tomatoes in the upper right there with blossom end rot? From what I've read, yes, you can just cut out the blossom end rot and you can eat the tomato. That I will leave up to you. Okay, let's move on to the next tomato. Sorry, the next vegetable if we have no questions. Beans are another popular vegetable, and I like beans because they're so quick to produce. They are a warm weather vegetable, but you can have the green snap beans, you can have pole beans, you can have yellow beans, you can have dried beans, you can have French beans. But as the bullets on the left mention, harvest will encourage more growth. The more you pick your beans, the more they will produce. Beans are another plant I like to put mulch underneath because the bean plant may kind of tip over and the beans will get on the soil, and I'm kind of lazy. I don't really like scrubbing and scrubbing to clean off. and the beans that are on the ground, if there's mulch, they'll be cleaner and I won't have dirt to mess with. So make sure you pick your beans as frequently as possible. If you don't, you may notice the blossoming stops and you may actually have a plant that doesn't produce any more beans at all. The third bullet point is important. Bean plants are very susceptible to waterborne diseases. If we get a rain or a heavy dew in the morning, try not to handle your plants or pick the beans until they dried off. Next, beets are another popular one. As the first bullet point mentions, yes, they will grow above the soil and you can eat them at any size. Roasted beets are great. Roxy, our third presenter, loves beet greens. So they're very versatile. They're a cool weather crop, but they will kind of hang in there through the season. My issue with beets that I've experienced is that mice will kind of chew around the bottom of the bulb that's exposed. So I tend to pick my beets before the mice get to them. Okay, broccoli is another popular one. I want your attention to focus on the bottom left picture. The first bullet point mentions a tight and compact head. And this is what is meant by tight and compact. The florets haven't pulled apart yet. And you can cut the entire head at any stage. It will look like the picture on the right, but broccoli's neat because it'll send up side shoots. Now, these side shoots, the florets are kind of pulling apart. So they're getting to the stage where each one of these little round globes that you see on there will actually open up into a flower. When it gets to that point, you're better off either leaving it for the pollinators or cutting it off and putting that flowering stalk in your compost heap. Okay, carrots are great also. However, if you leave them for very long, there's a chance if we've had a wet season that they just might rot, or as the first bullet point mentions, they become very woody, meaning they become very dense and hard to cut and inedible. They might also split open. So it's good to kind of check, just kind of pull the soil apart from your carrots to check on their progress. When Roxy mentioned thinning, carrots are a very important vegetable that benefits greatly from thinning. I usually, the second bullet point mentions loosening the soil. I use a pronged fork, a large digging fork to loosen the soil a distance away. And since most of us mentioned that we are in Steuben, Schuyler, and Chemung County, our soil may tend to be very much heavy with clay unless we have a raised bed garden. So there are short stubby carrots that are specially designed for heavy clay soil. Now I want to mention carrot seeds are very small, and when they germinate, they're almost impossible to see. What I do is I will sow some radish seeds with my carrot seeds. When the radish seeds come up, I know exactly where my carrot seeds are, and I can harvest radishes without damaging the carrot roots if I'm very lucky, or if I want, I just cut the radish plants off. But using radish seeds as row markers is not a bad idea. Cucumbers. Cucumbers can be grown vertically, they can be grown horizontally, but they tend to be very, I call them stealth vegetables. The leaves can be large and you think, oh, I don't have a cucumber yet. And you go out and check your garden and you push aside a leaf and oh my heavens, you've got a cucumber that looks the size of a zucchini. So please check your cucumber plants often. And using a garden tool to cut is not a bad idea. Cucumbers come in many, many different kinds. There's long ones, there's short ones, pickling ones. There's even round, yellow, globe-shaped cucumbers. So there's lots more that come on the market every year for gardeners. I've lumped all herbs together just to kind of talk about them in bulk form. Some are perennials, some are annuals. Your book will mention which ones are which, but it's good to really keep an eye on them. And the second bullet point mentions if you see flowers starting to form, especially with basil, just pinch off the flowers, just cut them off. You can use them as seasoning if you want, but you really mostly want the leaves for your herbs. The exception is coriander, which is in the upper right. Sorry, it's cilantro. I apologize. When it's leaves, it's cilantro. When it forms flowers and forms the seed pod, the seeds are actually coriander. So if you want coriander seed, let your cilantro go to flower and go to seed. Lettuces and greens are very easy to grow. And as I've mentioned, lettuces are now coming in purple colors, ruby colors, different shapes and textures. They're a very easy vegetable to grow, a cool season crop. But I want to mention the last bullet point. If the weather suddenly gets very warm and humid, your lettuce plant will all of a sudden form this spike that is in the bottom picture here. It will form flowers on the top. That's referred to as bolting. That means going to seed. Also, if all of a sudden your lettuce starts tasting bitter and you're not really keen on that, just pull your lettuce up, wait for cool weather, and plant lettuce again. Spinach is the same. Spinach, cutting it when it's cool, I have found that spinach will bolt quicker than lettuce. So I know that the temperatures might be in the upper 80s, possibly, sorry, not upper 80s, upper 70s this week. So I'm keeping a close eye on my spinach. And also for some of you that may have an interest in square foot gardening, this picture right here illustrates what square foot gardening can look like. The spinach obviously is growing in the foreground. They have lobelia flowers in the background. And on the far right, that might be collard greens, a cauliflower, or a broccoli there. So this is an example of what a square foot garden could look like. Radishes are popular also. And they come in, oh, the picture in the lower right shows you so many different shapes and sizes. If you're not keen fan of radishes because they're a little bit too sharp tasting for you, there are some milder varieties. With radishes, come late into the warm season, they also will get woody. They also will send up a flower stalk and bolt. So when that happens, when the radishes just aren't that crisp, tender flavor, I know, pull them up, wait for cool season, and plant radishes later on in the year. Okay, peas are popular. Peas are best grown vertically, supported with something, and there's many varieties. If you want just snow peas for a salad or a stir fry, or if you want the actual pea pods. And again, they are a cool season crop. The plants may survive into late July and August, but you may notice that there's fewer blossoms. And if the blossoms are pollinated, the pea pod itself may be twisted and contorted. That means it's just too warm for the peas. Peppers are another super popular vegetable. They love it warm. We've had people sending us questions at Cooperative Extension saying, I've got pepper flowers, but they don't seem to form fruit. And peppers are very temperature sensitive. If it's too cool at night or too hot during the day, the flower may not set fruit. The last bullet point on this slide, please make note, if you are growing hot peppers, yes, using gloves is a very, very good idea. There's also ornamental peppers out there, and I've grown ornamental peppers, and yes, they can be used for cooking too. Potatoes are fun to grow in containers. Make sure that when you do grow potatoes, that you grow seed potatoes. Some people will just take potatoes from their cupboard that have started growing from the eyes. There is a danger that you could have a potato with a soil-borne potato disease. So we recommend here at Cooperative Extension that you buy certified seed potatoes. If you're, as the last bullet point on there mentions, if your potato has kind of a greenish color to it, be very careful with eating it, because some people get upset stomachs from eating potatoes that have been grown in the sunlight. Squash is a super popular vegetable also. And my idea is I like to harvest them when they are small, as mentioned, about the size right there. We also have other questions that have come into Cooperative Extension. It's like, how come my squash isn't producing fruit? Well, summer squash and zucchini have two different kinds of blossoms. I'm going to try to circle this blossom that hasn't opened yet in the upper picture. This is the male blossom. However, the one behind it that I'm circling with the yellow fruit on it, that's a female blossom. Your zucchini or your summer squash will start forming fruit when the female flowers start appearing. That is also temperature dependent. If it's too cool during the season, they may not form until the weather gets warmer. Okay, onions are another easy crop to grow even in containers. They're a cool season crop, but they will grow throughout the season. And in stores, you can find them, as illustrated here in the middle picture, as little bulbs. And you can also find them, as illustrated in the lower right here. These might be in bunches, or they might be in a growing tray that you have to pull apart. Either one is fine. And as the guidelines have mentioned there, you can use them at any time. With onions, if you notice your onion all of a sudden sending up a stalk that has something on the end of it that's dome shaped, that is a seed pod, and you want to break off, or sorry, flower pod. You want to break off any flower pods that are on your onions. And onions, they have a lot of nutritional value, so I'm kind of pushing onions. Right now, for the next slide, I'm going to ask Master Gardener Brandy to please join us and unmute, because Brandy is going to talk about garlic. And Brandy, there we go.
Thank you so much. So garlic is one of my very favorite vegetables to grow. Up here in the north, we encourage you to use the kind of garlic that will produce scapes. And you'll see an example of scapes here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but in the upper left-hand, oh, thank you very much, Chris. Those are garlic scapes. And when you grow northern garlic, that's what you're going to find your garlic will do. It will send up a stalk from the center, and it'll form kind of an elongated dome that would, if you left it alone, would form a very pretty flower. But you want to watch for that and then chop those off before they have a chance to actually form the flower. This will cause the plant to send down all of its energy into the bulb, which is what you want when you're planting garlic. But also it will give you a bunch of yummy scapes that you can use in cooking. And they're very popular at farmers markets, from what I understand, and really wonderful in the home garden and for home cooks. You can make pesto out of them or just use them in stir fry when you're cooking. Garlic is really straightforward and simple. When you plant it in the fall, and then you can harvest it early part of summer. The way that you would do that is you want to loosen the soil around it. I recommend that folks dig a little bit further out than you think you might actually find the bulb, because you don't want to damage the bulbs when you dig them up. So you gently pull them up out of the soil, shaking the soil off, and then you need to let them dry for a while. So after you've shaken off the soil, you're going to let it sit. And a lot of folks ask, should I wash them? You shouldn't really wash them. I know that seems counterintuitive, right? But you don't want to really put moisture on your garlic. You can let them dry just right out of the ground in a cool, dark place. And then after they've fully dried and you can feel that they are dry, you can then start snipping off the bottom roots and then the top parts as well. And you can store them for a long time. I store them in the kitchen, like when you go to the store and buy garlic, you just take it home, right, and use it. At that point, you can start to wash it and then dry it at the house. So as far as actually harvesting it, folks ask, well, when do I know that the garlic's ready to be harvested? Just look to see when the top part of the garlic plant is starting to look like it's dying off. So it's going to start to turn yellow and get dry, and you'll think, okay, now it's time for me to get out there and start harvesting my garlic. And as far as preparing for the next season, you take your biggest cloves, biggest bulbs rather, break them down into cloves, and then use those really big cloves for your next plant. And that's how you can start perpetuating big, hearty, healthy garlic plants year after year. So you once you get some garlic plants, you can keep garlic plants indefinitely. It's a wonderful thing. Are there questions?
Okay. Thank you very much, Brandy. Okay. On behalf of all of our Master Gardener volunteers, that's Brandy, who did our first presentation about planning and also helping me out with garlic here, on behalf of Peg, who did the second one on soil, Roxy, who did planting, and myself, I'd like to say thank you. Now, Jingjing is going to continue the presentation, so please don't end. And I would like to encourage you, if you have any questions, contact your Cooperative Extension Office on page 81 in your manual, which again, the website is listed up there. On page 81 in your manual, it lists every county in New York State with the phone number for the Cooperative Extension Office. And also on page 88 and 89, there's additional gardening information if you want to check that out. There are more vegetables that are explained in your book. I just chose a small portion of them, and there's also more detailed explanation. So please consider your book as a great resource. And I would like to thank you very much for attending.